Hello, all. This is the Reverie Roundtable, which we have at Mondays, 8 p.m. Eastern, right? Watching us on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. We have a great group of individuals here. Excited to have them, right? So we can we'll start by introducing them. Start with Wick. Thank you, Wick, for being around. It's been quite a bit since we've talked. It feels like it's been like a week. I feel like just like
it's a week. It's been a week.
All right, too long. Wick, thanks for coming through. I hope you've been well.
I've been doing pretty good here. I missed last week, right? At least the closed portion, but I was able to hit the open portion, so that was fun as well. Thanks once again for having me on. I'm excited to talk about these topics today. Let's just get into it.
Okay, great. Please next, Scott. Thank you so much for coming back. Nice to see you. You doing like you're blocking your background here? Something happening in the back?
I mean, like we got green screens, so we're trying to transition the look, but we don't know what we're going to use in the background yet. So for now, it's just cleaner than having the fucking apartment, new lighting and stuff like that. You know, it happens. But yeah, so I'm Scott. We're an anarcho-capitalist duo stream. We do a lot of different stuff. Do a lot of interviews. So yeah, I mean, we've interviewed Dr. Walter Block, famous libertarian. We've interviewed Yaron Brook recently. We've done a bunch of different stuff like that. So check us out. Fabian Liberty pretty much everywhere. But yeah, it's always fun to come back here. It's always fun to get yelled at and get all the hate watchers from Prime's audience riled up for a little bit of fun and content for the both of us.
All right, thank you so much. Next, our friend Lactoid is here, who we've missed for a long time. Lactoid, thanks for coming back. Lactoid is a lot of fun, great addition to the community. Thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm doing good. I feel a lot better. Some of you don't know, I was sick for like 2 weeks, so it was a real pain in the ass, but I'm feeling a lot better now. My name is Lactoid. You can find me on Anti-Communism United on Discord and Twitch. I am currently streaming, so we're going to see how this goes. Apparently StreamYard is less difficult to figure out than Discord, so we're doing good. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. We have DeAndre Pace, a nice guy who has been with us on quite a few of our shows, right? They were just on us last week for All Black Everything, and we've been hitting them back up a few times because, we just enjoy having him around. How are you, Pace?
I am quite well, actually. Normally I don't do shows on Mondays because this is the one day off that I have in the week. But you hit me up, and I didn't have anything going on today. I was bored, so this is a nice change of pace for me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, next, let's go to our friend Isle. Hello, Isle. Great to have you once again. Isle is fast becoming one of our great regulars here, and always excited to have them around. So thank you, Isle, for being here.
Thank you. The natural light in the room is better than it has been the last couple of weeks, so I'm really glad about that. And I'm ready to have this discussion. Because I think one of the topics is similar to the last time I was on. So, it'll just be picking up where I left off, I guess.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Next, we have our friend Tiberius D. And Tiberius has been so missed. First of all, the thing we miss the most is bisexual lighting, right? Sending us a message and loud and clear. Thank you so much. Tiberius, it's a good friend of the community. How are you doing, friend?
I'm doing good. I was really upset that I wasn't able to get on that last panel that I requested to be on. Man, you guys had some good topics. I definitely wanted to see if I could get on here as soon as possible, and tonight really worked out, so it's always good to be back. If anyone doesn't know who I am, I'm Tiberius D. I'm basically the geopolitics extraordinaire. I talk about what's going on in the rest of the world because some people forget what's going on out there while you're looking on what's going on at home. And while 2022 has been very destructive with the Russia-Ukrainian war and a few other things going on in Sri Lanka and whatnot, 2023 is looking to be even worse. So if you want all the juicy details on how the world is going to hell, come check out what I'm doing over there.
Absolutely. All right. And last but not least, we have our good friend Fanatic, Mr. Fanatic to you. All right. Back with us once again, laying down truth, I'm sure, right? There's something close to it. Truth.
I got no choice but to do that.
So Fanatic, thanks for being around.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm kind of excited. This is going to be, I think, a good show. I can't. One of these topics, I'm going to say which one is going to be amazing. So yeah, we're going to see me get to whip my metaphorical dick out on these topics, and I'm very excited to do so. You guys can follow me twitch.tv/Mr. Fanatic and get ready for some hot takes. I'm very tempted not to stream this so I don't get banned, but I'm going to say the stuff that I want to say, and let's see if they actually come for me.
Okay, well, or be careful we put.
Yo, what about PrimeCayes stream?
So be careful when you put that dick because you might get monkeypox. All right, let's get on to the first.
I can't wait for that one.
Let's go to the first topic. All right, topic 1. Enrollment is declining in major city public schools. This is due to many factors, but a major reason was the pandemic. Now school districts are deciding whether they should close/consolidate schools or keep those. Sorry, I'm getting some background noise from someone. I'm like
King Odin.
Yeah. If you could mute yourself.
Is it me?
Yep.
Yeah, no problem.
It can't be me. My headphones are on.
It's still coming through on you, so just mute yourself on Discord whenever you're not talking, and you'll be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't see.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Well, I'm just testing the sound. Looks good. Okay. I'm going to start up over again. Enrollment is declining in major city public schools. This is due to many factors, but a major reason was the pandemic. Now, school districts are deciding whether they should close/consolidate schools or keep these small schools open that still do serve their communities. Do you think that shrinking schools should be closed? Do you think that closing these schools is a positive trend? And if so, how best should we serve the communities that lose a public school? Yeah, so there's a big thing happening in the places around the country. It's just enrollment is falling, and it's causing all kinds of financial issues. Oftentimes, the money is tied to the children. So if the children are gone, there's less money there, but not as if like the school itself shrinks or some fixed costs shrink as well, right? Like you got to pay a principal a certain amount or something like that, right? So these schools are in dire straits. So what exactly should be the answer? I hope this would be like a different type of topic because we don't really usually talk about this stuff. So hopefully this will work out. So please, we'll start with Blake.
Yeah, this is a pretty complex issue, and it's also pretty fluid, right? Like you mentioned, it's because of the pandemic that a lot of this is happening, right? And we can see the trend lines; these change over time, and as we have more events, right, this can be, become more problematic or less, right? I think overall we need more school infrastructure, a lot less. Obviously, there's a line where we would close the schools, right? If there's literally no one there. You would probably want to close these facilities down. But I think that transitioning to smaller facilities, right, transitioning to more kind of flexible education like that is probably a good thing. It is going to cost money, right? It is going to be something we need to adjust to. But I think that's part of the reason we pay taxes, right, is to put these things in place. And I think that's a very good thing to do. And I would, again, it's a complex issue. There's a lot of moving parts here. But as a principle, we need more infrastructure in education, not less. And that's what I go by.
Okay, thanks so much. All right. Next, we have our friend, Scott, please.
Yeah, so I think that this is probably one of the greatest things that, like, one of the greatest positives that have come out of the pandemic. The idea that schools are bleeding because parents for the first time were kind of able to see just how shitty our public education system is. I think a lot of parents had their heads buried in the sand and assumed that public schools were, educating their children in a positive way. I think it has been a major cause for people being able to understand, all of the ideologies that are pushed in schools. But more than that, right? Far more than that, and far more detrimental than that, is just how shitty our public education system is. I mean, on average, it's somewhere between 15 to 30% better that homeschool kids score on tests. They're way ahead of kids that are in public school. The parents have more freedom. When we look at statistics for even things like preschool and early start, what we find is that all of the gains that you get from school disappear by third grade, and that children that go to school earlier have more behavioral problems, lower reading comprehension, worse math skills, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we know that preschool and like early start and things like that are bad. Well, why is that? It's because they're not at fucking home. They're not learning values. They're not having a strong psychological attachment to their siblings and to their parents. And the even greater thing that I think about the freedom of parents to kind of begin to take over that education and take a more active role in that education, the kind of the last thing is that this takes people out of the labor market. And it takes people out of the labor market, which you might think, well, that's less GDP, that's bad, right? But the fact of the matter is that we need less taxes because less schools are open. If schools close, we don't need, and because people are being homeschooled, then we don't need as much money being given to the government so that they can pay for education. And what does that mean when people are out of the labor market? Well, what that means is that as people move out of the labor market becomes more competitive and wages rise because the labor market's more competitive, right? Like if 1,000 people drop out of a application pool of 2,000 and you have to hire 500, well, in order to get the best people, you're going to have to pay more money. So increased wages, a better economy, families being able to actually stay home and take care of their children, and education being better. All of these are wonderful things. And are there going to be some bumpy roads as we figure out school closures, or some communities going to be hit worse, and we might have to figure out how to allocate resources to fix that in the interim? Absolutely. But I am so excited that the education system is crumbling to a certain degree because parents are realizing that public education is one of the worst forms of child abuse that you could do to your children.
Scott's so reasonable. Scott always a little too cautious, with his opinions. Doesn't want to give it to you all. Right? It's like he gives them a little morsels. Thanks so much, Scott. All right, next we have our Blackboard.
I went to public school. I don't think it was abuse, but there's room for different opinions, I guess. On the topic, I think school closings can be positive. If there's not a pragmatic basis to keep a school open, I think it would make sense just to close the school and bus the kids to a different school. I think these things should be decided on a pragmatic basis, factoring in the costs of busing versus keeping a school open. But generally speaking, I think it is a good thing that public schools are catching some flack. I think this could be a basis now for reviewing how schools do when we decide which schools should stay open. This could be an opportunity to separate the wheat from chaff.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, next we'll go to our friend. I'm not looking at the screen. Pace.
Well, I think that the schools having issues is a very good sign. It's a good sign to show that parents have become aware of the crap that happens in public schools. And I'm a big proponent of public schools. I love public schools. I went to public school. However, the problem with public schools has been present for decades. And if we had listened to the writings and suggestions of people like Milton Friedman back in the 60s, we wouldn't have the problems that we have right now. If they would have issued a voucher system to allow the money to follow the child, as opposed to just been lumped in wherever and allowing the teachers unions to determine everything. So I'm hoping that a lot of this causes a mass awakening to parents, and it causes the degeneration of the Department of Education, which is wholly unnecessary for the federal government. And hopefully it completely dismantles and destroys the teachers union, which is detrimental to our children.
Thanks so much. All right, next, our friend Isle.
Okay, so listen, I'm coming into this as an outsider. I've only went to public school for 4th grade and kindergarten. from 5th grade on, I was in Catholic school all the way to I got my bachelor's degrees in undergrad. So, I don't know much about public school, but I do know about very small class sizes from my schooling experience. And what I think is so good about having a small class experience, with these declining enrollment rates, is that if the class sizes are smaller, that means that the teachers and the facilities will have more one-on-one we'll have more opportunities to form one-on-one bonds with the students, because I think that's how you foster like student learning and student growth. It's like when you can actually have like a name basis with your like a janitor and your lunch lady, and like all the teachers know your name, and all your classmates know your name, all your grade mates know your name, and you're well known throughout the whole school. That's how you like grow as a person, because you get to have like very interpersonal relationships. You get to form those. You're not just one number, like some one like atomized individual in like 1,000-person sea of like bodies flooding through the halls. Like, no, you're like one person who goes into class with maybe like 10 to 15 people, and then there's only maybe like five classes in like one grade, and there's only like 4 grades in the school. I think that that's probably going to be a better situation for students to learn, than just having like these giant schools with like thousands of kids in there that no person can possibly attend to in an efficient and reasonable manner, and especially not one that will propagate growth in the students' well-being, whether it be like scholastically or with their physical or mental health. So I think that if we can keep the way that it is now with like low student populations, but we have the same amount of funding, I think that we could actually keep the kids in these communities that like have very small, excuse me, um, class sizes and enrollment rates in these schools, in these communities that really need these schools to be open, because where else are they going to go, especially if it's a low socioeconomic area. I think that with the funding not being cut and these small class sizes, we can actually invest all that time and energy into those few kids that are there, and actually raise them to probably what they would be if there was a private school. And I think that's how the ticket on how to get these kids out of these drastic straits that we see, and these disparities between like the really rich private schools and like the really poor public schools, because it's not just about
Sure.
money, but it's also about time and
Yeah.
care. And that's it.
Well,
Thank you.
that's no problem. Tiberius, please.
Yeah, so 2 things here. When it comes to, I gotta hit the cause first, and I'm not gonna pull my punches on this one since you all want to be spicy too. Progressive values kill societies, whether it is the general leftist utopias of Germany, Italy, and Spain, or whether you're talking about the American Northeast, is that these societies are lacking children. Because whether it's the cost of living or just the general breakdown in how these societies function, is that these are societies that make it to where you do not want to have children. And that is the number one reason what we are seeing. If you look at the average age of these states, particularly the Northeast Corridor, they're all the oldest states in the Union outside of Florida because it's a freaking retirement home. The long and the short here is that these folks are going to have reality smack them in the face, and they're going to have to decide what they want to invest in. Yes, they can keep running 40% budgets of state healthcare. They can do that. Or they can invest in the future of their own children and make it where families want to live there and make it to where the cost of living is half decent. This is what happens when reality finally catches up to you. The decadence of these values is over. And so we are either going to see these states become depopulated over the next 30 years because no one can afford to live there, or they're going to have to make the choices of, do they want their schools funded to where people want to move there so they have a future for their own children, or are they going to keep Medicare Part C floating so that they can keep old people there and retirees there, but no longer serve the interest of their own public? And I'll end with that.
Thank you. Let's go to Fanatic.
Yeah, I think it's a scary thing. I mean, public education is kind of necessary, and an educated population just tends to have better results. So I mean, that's obviously problematic if we see like a decline in these kinds of things. But Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess we should get into the open, and I think we can start by, since I'm the last person. Oh wait, there's another person. Son of a cuck. All right. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I think it's terrible. I do think there's a piece of a good thing then. Okay, I am a person that very much believes in homeschooling. I very much don't believe in the public education system, but I do also recognize that it's probably necessary for most people because most people aren't going to be invested into teaching their children properly. So because of that, then we probably need these systems. The fact that it's declining at the rate it is kind of scary. It has nothing to do with the pandemic. It has nothing to do with people finally being woke to what's happening in schools. Do some research. Next.
Thank you so much. All right. Last but not least, we have a brand new individual. We were like setting up their appearance like while this was all like while it was live. So the last second. But I'm very happy to have them. They are a person who's been recommended to us by Doobie, and that's happened a few times, and you all know what has happened every time that's been the case. But we'll cross our fingers and hope for the best here. Basil Esposito, am I saying your name correctly?
Yeah, it's Basil Esposito. Greetings.
Yes, greetings to you. Thank you so much for being here. Definitely appreciate having you here. We were just doing our openings, right? So our opening statements. So please go ahead. What are your opening statements to the first topic, being the public school one, and then also introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Basil Esposito. I would suppose politically, I'd say I'm the most far right person here. I would like to say regarding public school is. Just in response to Fanatique, I actually agree with Scott. I believe that public school must be abolished. I believe that there is an erroneous assumption concerning the values which must be propagated. That one, the Socratic idea that knowledge is inherently good, and two, the idea that we must have an equality of education, that everyone deserves an education. This is wrong. In an antique society, it was the case that what the family would do is they don't always teach the sons into the craft of the father. The means by which we learn, the means by which we are educated, is through a means of incessant repetition on a particular thing, because we are stupid monkeys. And our system, the one which we have now, derived from the Prussians in the early 1700s. It's a very recent, modern concoction, which was then later adopted by the Germans in order to teach everyone how to read. And there was a purpose for this. This was good. But now what it does is it manifests a dispersal of information and knowledge into a realms which is completely unsuitable for the manifestation of any specialization in the marketplace. So that would be all I have to say, to be concise.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so let's jump into it. Open to the panel.
Just to be really clear, I want to say first off, the fact that like something that Fabian said earlier, that like the majority of like children who like do early start and preschool do way worse, and that's just not true. Like I mean, like
It's
literally.
true.
The most cursory of readings will give you like the thing. I went ahead and just wrote down the quote from. It says the group of children who attended preschool significantly outperformed their peers who did not attend preschool in all countries by 19 to 77 score points on the PIRLS reading scale. These values are similar to those perpetuated in international PIRLS report. So that's just that didn't sound true on its face. I feel like the studies all suggest this. I'm a product of someone who went to preschool, and I outperformed everybody in my dang state. Now, maybe I was just a gifted, smart kid, maybe, but I think that the preschool absolutely helps. My brother, I come from a family of, 9. And my oldest brother was the only other person in our family who also did preschool, and he also outperformed everybody in his state. Now, all of my siblings, all of us did well, but the two of us that stood out the most was the oldest and the youngest, and it just so happens to be we were the two people who attended preschool. Now, were we already gifted? Possibly, probably. You know what I'm saying? I'm a blessed nigga, but come on now, like the numbers are there. Can you show me any studies that say otherwise?
Yeah, so you want to check out Dr. Ferran. NPR did a piece about him because a lot of the problems with these studies is that they're not long-term studies, right? So when you give someone like a basic education earlier in math and science and reading comprehension, obviously, like if you just think about it, they're going to be better at those things in the short term. The problem is what happens when you separate them from their family at an earlier age. The idea being that we have an assumption that it's good, right? Because you're getting socialized with a larger group of your peers, but that assumption turns out to not necessarily bore out in the data when you look at it long term. When you look at long-term studies, and there are several, I'll throw them in the chat once I grab them for you, right here in a minute while other people talk. But the problem is that over time, the leads that you gained in that early start, right, they fall away. And what you don't get is you don't get that time back that you weren't involved with the family, that you weren't, forming healthy relationships with the family, that you weren't learning other things and other values. And so what you end up with is more behavioral issues, higher rates of neuroticism, well, not necessarily neuroticism, but higher rates of diagnosis of issues. So, one would assume higher rates of neuroticism. They're kind of pretty heavily correlated, but, and lower test scores. But
Well,
I'll get those studies to you in a minute.
Yeah, thank you. Because I'm just reading something that's also saying, again, disparities in education achievement are established early in the life course. And once these gaps are established, children's prospects of upward mobility are diminished. These initial differences in early childhood often accumulate into long-term differences in educational attainment because they shape children's early experience, including their interaction with teachers and classmates. This study is specifically talking about the persistence of preschool effects from early childhood through adolescence. So it doesn't seem to me like that this is something that just goes away magically or anything. I think you're just wrong here, buddy.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'll send them to you. I'm just going to grab
Kyle,
a couple for you.
Kyle, before that was coming from you, if you have headphones, please use them instead, because that'll be helpful. But you can say what you have to say.
I was going to say, I think we have a mismatch of values, because I think Fabian is saying that they become worse in emotional intelligence and spiritual psychological damage because they're outside of their family units for these very foundational periods of time in their lives, because like between newborn to 5 is when their brains are the most spongy and able to develop and grow by watching and being in with their families the most. And so if you're taking them out and putting them into a environment that's not their family unit, that can have some effects that we're probably not seeing, although they might actually have this scholastic achievement that will allow them to far outpace their peers when they get to the higher grades. I think
Okay, so maybe we're not having a mismatch in data then, because it seems like, okay, so what's happening is if we're going to be judging preschool based on its educational merit, because that's the purpose of preschool. So then if that's what we're saying, and yes, they are outperforming their peers, then yeah, so it seems like it is a beneficial thing. Now, if we want to start trying to offset the advantages, the educational advantages that the test scores reveal for children who attend to preschool by saying, well, there's some other social skills and things that might have been diminished. Sure, you can go to that, and and maybe that might be true. Hell, I did not have a high social IQ at all. I was very emotionally retarded. So maybe that's a thing. But I just know as far as the educational stuff is there, then
I just sent in the StreamYard chat one study, right? And this is just from, if you want to dig in past the abstract, you got to unlock it on Sci-Hub. I had a copy somewhere, but this is a recent study, 2022, right? Data through 6th grade from the state education records show that the children randomly assigned to attend pre-K had lower state achievement test scores in 3rd through 6th grades than control children, with the strongest negative effects in 6th grade. A negative effect was also found for disciplinary infractions, attendance, and receipt of special education services, with null effects on retention. These implications of these findings for pre-K policies and practices are discussed, and then they go in further. Right.
This is all almost beside the point, right? This is all almost beside the point. There's an argument to get into here, and the study you linked, it didn't even have an abstract. I'd have to get access. Otherwise, it had a correction, right? And it also mentioned it wouldn't be published.
I don't know.
It wouldn't be actually published until the 2023 at some point, right?
Yeah,
so I'm not sure
I'll
if it's gone through the
grab
peer
more if
review
you need more.
I'm just not sure how to interact with it. That's all. But when it comes down to like homeschooling in general, and one of
People
the
are so
frustrations
anti-science.
is fucking
Oh, sorry.
stop,
Oh my God.
right?
Yeah,
I
let him
thought
go.
I was
So
muted.
okay, one of the frustrating parts of this, right, is we have a topic laid out, and it's a question on funding, and that's a discussion we should have, but we cannot have that. It's being held hostage by extremists who are like, we should destroy it all, burn it down, watch it crumble, right? And that's just it hijacks the conversation, and it keeps us from having any kind of educated back and forth about this, right? Because it's all through this extremist ideological lens. But when it comes down to it, like public education, whether you think it's good or bad, is necessary as a society, because there's a lot of families who cannot afford to stay home and educate their own children because they have to live, they have to earn bread, right, for their family to eat. And so when you take away public education, when this is reduced, right, what you get is disparities that primarily affect poor households and single family income, people with single parents and things like that, and it just hurts them the most. So whether or not in an ideal vacuum we like homeschool would be better or public school would be better, the fact is we need public school system, and we need a robust, competitive public school system that we can go with.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, I agree.
We evidently no. Wait, hold on. We evidently don't need public academia since it's a very recent construction. What you're actually doing is you're hijacking the conversation by erroneously supposing that you have the means, the mechanism to assert what is a normal value system. The idea that it is natural, normal to have egalitarian principles, equality within a society that's premised upon a natural ordering of rank, upon hierarchy, it's just completely erroneous. Now, all I want to say concerning the study thing, basing a metric of aptitude on reading comprehension through academia in relation to people who are homeschooled in a modern framework is very, very unfair, because you have an issue in which the people whom you're selecting for are people who are selected for who have been adulterated by the individualistic libertarian liberal modern mindset. So thereby, I don't think many, for example, single mothers are capable of properly homeschooling their children. And so I would
can you stop and re-say what you're saying? Can you condense it? Because I'm not the only person here that doesn't understand what the hell you're talking about. Okay. Can you re-say that like in a pretty clear and concise way?
I believe I am being clear and concise. It's not my fault the dog doesn't understand what I'm saying when I speak to it. But
it might be. You don't speak his language, idiot. So restate it. Thank you.
So concisely, the notion of needing to educate everyone to an equal standardized level is completely erroneous. All of history has contended against this notion. You saying that is necessary because we must have this is fallacious. And then secondly, concerning your study, the fact that your sample size has to do with modern people who are brought up in a system in which public academia rules means that you cannot actually have a proper evaluation of the
I
efficacy.
just want to make it clear. Maybe you missed it, right? But I think that look, when we talk about necessary, obviously isn't necessary. But when it comes to my value system that I use, which is mostly egalitarian in nature, I think that education has been shown, like education is how we be more free as a people. Ignorance enslaves. Education paves the way for people to be able to make educated decisions and intelligent choices in their lives. So I'm not sure exactly what you're trying to get at. Just because historically it hasn't been the norm, fine, right? I'll cede to that. Like historically it hasn't been the norm, but there's a lot of things that have been done historically as norms in the past that we would not want to have. We need to change them. We need to progress with the times.
Okay, Foucault has a brilliant book called Discipline and Punishment, in which he makes a brilliant analogy of academia and prison systems. Okay, the fact is that you being constrained and having to be spoken down to by a old middle-aged widow, and being forced to be restrained and learn within a very, very open-ended, restricted, abstracted confines of education is absolutely not optimal, not absolutely on a psychological sense destructive.
What would you prefer?
in terms of my preference, I would prefer a system of a greater amount of trade, something akin to a guild system, but with less government oversight, and also more individual trade within families in which the son is being mentored by the father.
Wait,
on
hold
board.
on. Do you think that the father can't, that the son can't be mentored by the father because of the fact that their children, attend public education?
No, yeah, absolutely. It takes so much time out of their lives, and the father is constrained to work far more often because he must compete with his wife in the market system. Absolutely, it's impossible. So there's so many fake jobs which have been manifested.
I gotta go to our new friend Tiberius and Lactoid.
I'm just loving all the lefties on here that have never heard real right wingers speak. It's kind of funny. You guys have no idea what he's talking about because you just never talk to a real right winger. Only
we can understand him. It's surprising that he's so willing to be this so ignorant in public. It's just surprising.
Nice argument, calling me ignorant. Good one.
Okay, all right. So let's go to our friend Tiberius.
That's the guy who called me a dog.
Lactoid. Tiberius being a Twitch right winger. So.
Tiberius is also a lefty.
Super lefty Tiberius coming in here. All right, so I don't have time to read whatever you guys are posting regarding the studies. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I don't have time to, because I can literally read about one study for debate. Anyway, long story short, at least from what I have seen and overall data that I've come prepared with, is that while education has incredible returns on it, the normalized ROI, whether it is preschool, whether it is normal school, all the way up to college, is decreasing. Now, there's a big conversation on if that is due to the fact that costs of education is just going through the roof, or is it because schools are being less effective? That's a whole subject to itself. I won't get into that unless you guys want to go down that particular rabbit hole. I didn't get a chance to write down my notes on the second thing that I was going to talk about. Somebody said something to trigger the fuck on me. I'll have to remember. Pass it on to the next person.
Okay,
really quick. Please. Can we just say what's actually causing this problem? Can we get to that? Do you guys understand what's actually causing this?
What are we talking about? Are we talking about
too many students per class size?
No. Like the problem. The problem of the original prompted question is that these schools were having less children overall. So they're like, all right, do we cut back the size of the schools? Yep. Do we cut down certain schools? Like I stated it in there, and I know that sounded like a meme to some people. The reality is that a lot of the Northeast just doesn't have kids in the same way that a lot of the rest of the country does.
Why is birth rate good? I think we have too many people. Most people are superfluous sheep. Why
we're not saying whether birth rate is good. That wasn't what was stated. What we're stating is what is the actual cause for the decline in enrollment in these schools. And while other people were saying erroneous nonsense, like, the cause of this is because people in the pandemic are finally getting the chance to see what's happening in these schools, or people are mad at liberalism and what that's being hand-fisted into people's education. It's not that. It's actually that just people aren't having kids and a decline in immigration. Those are the things in certain regions. That's what's causing the drop down.
Clarification, but it can be both things, right? Like, you don't have to do a univariate analysis that said you're wrong by saying that there's a surge of people pulling their children out of school, and both. But
you have no evidence to point to what you're saying.
Thank you. Why. That's exactly what I'm. So here's the difference. One of these things,
there's no evidence. One of these
things we can quantify, which is the thing where you can see the decline in birth rate and things like that, and just less children being in these regions that are typically having these kids. That you can go with that one, and then the other thing that you're talking about, as far as just opinion pieces about people being so disgruntled with the public education system, with the liberal ideas within them, you don't have anything to support that. One is quantifiable, and the other one is just your opinion.
Just because you can quantify a declining birth rate doesn't mean that that's the reason that there's less people engaging in academic systems. You can easily make an argument that it isn't merely declining birth rate. Birth rates increasing because the thing is that we have massive amounts of immigration and all of these people who would be capable and willing to engage in the system. Okay, I don't believe our population is declining. Maybe it's declining with white people.
I know. So let's go to Lactoid. Let's go to Lactoid first. We'll be waiting.
All right. Wick, you were going off on something that I wanted to push back a little bit against when you're saying that, you can argue this is good, you can argue it's bad, but we need to have it. I don't know if that's true, right? I mean, I've been looking at this. There seems to be studies on both sides. There's some studies that indicate that pre-K education is incredibly beneficial. But then there is some studies, like one Scott posted, that appear to indicate that it's not.
That one, no, that you can't count that one. We can't read that study. The abstract isn't really even saying anything. We have no idea what they're talking about.
It's just looking at the data from Tennessee. Also, I just want to point out.
Yeah, that one doesn't count. So, Blackwell, you got another one? You can finish your point, but I'm saying that one doesn't count. So,
okay,
the other one?
Real quick. Just real super quick. Bellwether Education Partners just releasing numbers that 3 million students have been reported missing from the education system since the pandemic.
Wait, no, that had nothing to do with what we were talking about.
Can we free Lactoid? I want to hear what Lactoid has to say.
Yeah. It had everything to do with what I was talking about. You were just denying this
shit. Okay. Shit. So I did find another study which seemed to indicate that it had negative effects. I did find a couple that seemed to indicate that it had really positive effects. But the fact that there's some studies that indicate there's negative effects when you have the president who's advocating for like universal pre-K education, spending a hell of a lot of money on this, I think that absolutely is relevant. Like we should know for sure before we spend a whole crap ton of money on this, whether or not it actually is like beneficial, first of all, to justify the cost, but also that it's not a negative, right? Because if we're spending money to hurt ourselves, it seems like a bad idea.
So if the data is mixed, right? And I'm just going to stipulate it too. Like, again, I haven't looked at the studies you're sourcing. I can't speak to the veracity or anything like that. And I think it's a little weird to, I don't have the time needed to go through and kind of get into these studies. So again, just intuitively, right? And we can look at these things like, even if the data is mixed on that, we still need to keep it as is, because getting rid of it and the negative outcomes that might become because of that, I think are far worse. Not just to education, right? Because education serves dual purposes in society. Public education specifically. Public education allows both parents to work who might need to work. It acts as a form of daycare, and it might not be intended as that, and ideally it shouldn't be that. But the fact that it is, again, we can see that removing public education, and again, I didn't come prepared to defend public education as a whole, right? But removing public education would have disastrous effects on many people's incomes, right? It's just a lot of families just cannot afford to homeschool their kids and hold a job, right? They just do not have the time. They do not have the resources. And so you're going to create this kind of really divide in America over the have-nots and haves. And that's already creating problems.
The only reason that they're incapable of affording for their children to be educated, which wouldn't necessarily be needed, assuming that the father's capable of teaching his children or his child. It's because of a certain tribe of slaves who've allowed for an influx of immigration, allowed for women to compete with men, which manifests in the labor surplus, decreasing the wages of the
tribe of slaves? What tribe of slaves are you talking about? What tribe of slaves? What do you mean?
I'm not sure if I can be too open about this clandestine, esoteric peoples, but they have a very prominent feature right here.
Is this your lawyer?
God, here we go.
I'm not defending. Hold on.
Let's not move. Can we not?
Okay.
Can we not? Can we just not have this conversation?
The point is, it's a manifestation of a labor surplus. Okay, the only people who should be working is the fathers, and they should be teaching their children.
But a lot of fathers cannot. They're incapable. A lot of fathers just cannot teach their kids properly. They just don't know how. Educate.
And they will be the slaves of my society. They need not to know how to read.
I think it's really important. That you guys keep stressing that homeschooling, right, is like a mom and a dad, and like one of them like teaches their kid. Like that's not what homeschooling is to a metric fuck ton of people, right? Sure. Like a lot of times, and it has been growing, especially people like the Amish and the Mormons, right? What they have figured out is what happens is one of the parents takes one day off a week and they work 4 days, or they work one weekend day and they work full-time regular. And on their day off, be it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they take turns taking like 5 kids, and they have a lesson plan in the things that they know about, the things
there's a lot of
they're
communities
specialized
where
in.
that would not work. There's a lot of communities, especially
but
more urban centers, right, where that simply would not
Okay,
work.
let's make sure.
what
Let's
you're
make sure.
talking about
Lactoid.
is
Hold
if
on,
that's
Lactoid.
the
Did you ever
only
finish your
way that
point? You actually
homeschooling
finished
is
your
Yeah,
point, Lactoid.
Wick. I mean, I feel at the same time. I agree with you. I'm not going to go as far as to say that like public education's child abuse or that we need to abolish it all, replace it with the guild system. I don't believe that personally. But at the same time, like there is a reasonable position here of we should be like very carefully like vetting all of the educational programs that we're paying for and that we're putting in front of children. And also, in certain circumstances, it might not make sense to put kids through this kind of education. Maybe it's not the best idea to put kids through preschool. Maybe it could be that it's not the case, like a good thing for some people to be going through all of high school, right? Germany is a program where you can go 2 years in high school and then you go right into the workforce after 2 years. And for a lot of people, this is incredibly beneficial for them because they're going to learn work skills and they're going to be able to make some money earlier than their peers, or even their peers might be able to make more money down the road. I mean, there's still a lot of people who might not be able to get to that point anyway, right? Wick, wouldn't you agree that for those people, maybe instead of high school, like maybe they should go in the workforce right away?
To respond to your question, right? Like I think that again, having the when it comes to vocational education after high school, I'm for that, right? I think we fetishize college education much too much. But when we talk about grade school, right? When we're talking about like the pre-K, kindergarten, sixth grade, like up to ninth grade and things like that, I think again, right? The system we have in place should be vetted, right? It's okay to make reforms, right? I think there's a great discussion about school vouchers that we could have had, right? But instead, we're having this discussion about whether we should demolish public education entirely. I think that's just amazingly sad.
Let's build a bridge right here, then. Okay, so, I think two reasonable proposals here would be like for some kids who are like old enough. Maybe going right into the workforce might be better, like in terms of a kind of.
What do you mean by old enough? Old enough.
Like high school, right? Would you agree?
So
with
in
that?
ninth grade, like you think that some kids should be able to opt out? That's already the case, I believe, in many cases.
I'm not aware of to what extent that's is the case.
I could be wrong.
When you're 16, once you're at the age of 16, you're able to opt out. And so you have an entirety of most of your formative ages in which your mind is most plastic that you're incapable of leaving. This is true. There is some dependency on the state, but most states at 16.
Okay, I'll look into that. Wick, are you in favor of that system?
I think that allowing it as an option is okay, right? I think that I'm not against homeschooling as an option, right? What I am against is it being the only option, right? And I think that the public funding should go towards public education, right? Like I think I think the public funding and things like that should go towards education. We need to build strong, the government specifically, the state, right, needs to build strong infrastructure for public education to provide access to as many people as possible to get that education. Because again, homeschooling, whether you do it as a single family or as a co-op sort of system, right, that's not an option for everyone, nor should it be. And in fact, it may not be the best option, even if they do have access to that. So
last question for the panel. Real quick, last question for the panel. Vouchers would seem like a pretty effective way to solve this problem if kids would be able to get vouchers for either going into private schools in their area or simply going to different public schools. Why isn't that just the fix for this? Like you close the small inefficient schools.
The problem with vouchers is that government money almost always comes with strings. And so a lot of the school choice people love to compromise on that. And so that could present a lot of future issues. But if it was not attached with those strings, that'd be great. But here's the fact of the matter, right? We spend $669 billion a year on K through 12 spending at the federal level, $764.7 billion a year at the state level. It's 7.9% of our federal budget. Combined, it's about $1.3 trillion, which comes out to about $4,400 a year per American citizen, many of whom don't have children. From the children's perspective, it comes out, depending on where you live, somewhere between $11,000 per year per child to $25,000 per year per child. Now, if you're talking about how, oh my God, it's impossible, how could these poor people pay for these things? just give them the fucking money. If it's tied to the fucking children, and I'm a mother and father, and I have 3 children, the minimum is $33,000 a year I would be paid just to homeschool my children, which is like not the greatest job, but a pretty good job.
What kind of structure would you have in place to punish parents who did not spend the money they gave on their children's education? How would you track it? Right? How would you enforce it? All these things would balloon the costs, right?
Like it would not just be these costs, but you would add more. The state to punish parents.
No, wait. They currently do this.
Their children.
Wait. Homeschool kids currently have to like hit certain.
Already exists.
Yeah, homeschool kids have to like be tested and they have to hit certain requirements.
I understand that, but when Scott talks about giving the money that we would be instead putting into their public education directly to the parents, that money, right? Like, how do we ensure that it gets? Or I guess I should ask: do you care that it is spent on the child?
No, I don't care how those parents spend that money if they're meeting the requirements and educating their children. Just like I don't think the government should be investigating every single mother that gets child support to make sure that every child support payment goes directly towards that child. I think you demanding that the government step in to investigate parents in what they do with the way that they choose to educate their children is some draconian bullshit. And I would be curious, do you support the state regularly investigating single mothers to make sure that all child support payments go to the children? Or is it just on the things that like you particularly like in a particular argument?
Let's not shift too quickly. I just want to say there's a bit of hypocrisy occurring here in which you're completely disregarding the fact that public education does not do any service at all, regardless of how cheap it is, at properly educating the youth. Okay.
You make these statements, but you're just asserting things out of thin air.
Yes,
you're making shit up.
I can substantiate. I want to say though, primarily I really dislike the disregard in terms of emotional health. You see, what a man is as a biological creature, it's one who territorializes, one who engages in combat. Play fighting is not allowed in the playground. They are completely intellectually stunted by this fact. They are forced down into seats by domineering women who are far past their prime age for fertility, and they are made confused because they're not capable of expressing their masculine. They're not. Wait, hold on. Let me.
This guy, he's definitely a bot.
Let me just speak. The Bronze Age pervert. Bat makes a brilliant argument. There are precocious children in academia. They realize that they're incapable of expressing their biological imperative as men, and so thereby they internalize the conflict and assume that the problem must be with themselves, and so they falsely erroneously assume that they must actually be more feminine. And this is how the manifestation of transsexualism comes about. Well, let's talk about school shooters. Okay, I don't think we'd have school shooters if we didn't have schools. We wouldn't have school shooters. No school.
Esposito. Okay, look, listen, Basil, listen. Okay, when you are talking to lefties, you cannot drop every red pill all at the same time. Okay, you have to sprinkle the red pills into your arguments. These people have never spoken to real right wingers. They've never actually spoken to a fascist. They just call people fascists. They've never spoken to a third positionist. They've never spoken to anybody nowhere near your side.
Please don't assume what I've discussed with
instead of like just letting this nigga suck him off, let's go ahead and talk about the fact that one, your idea is just stupid on its face, whether you're leftist or righty or anything. And here's why. Because at the end of the day, when you start talking about these trades and like whatever, one of the founding principles of the United States always is about personal freedom, allowing people to like make the choices for the direction that they want to take their lives. And one of the easiest way of ensuring that people have the ability to do that is to do something like public
I believe
education.
in slavery, by the way.
It's to do something. It's okay, good. That's why you're an idiot. It's to do something. I'm just talking to the rest of the people who actually have working brains. It's to do something like public education. And the reason for this is because there are plenty of people who would otherwise have forced their children into trades that those children might not find desirable. So if you decided, like, for example, if my dad happens to be a person that worked in fiberglass, he actually did work in SR-71. If he worked in fiberglass, but I didn't want to work on the freaking fiberglass, the idea that my dad would just not put me in education and would force me to learn freaking fiberglass sounds absolutely abysmal, right? And anyone can see all of the various fields that fathers wouldn't want to. So this whole guild idea,
we have nihilism.
This guild idea like it seemed like it was really effective back in like feudalism, right? Because of the fact that people were literally struggling to make their ends meet. And when you invested in a family business, there wasn't like a whole like lot of infrastructure that was going to like help you be able to just like survive or do whatever the freak you needed to do. So you just took whatever the freak you can get. We're not there nowadays. We have an entire society where people have where freedom is like the literal foundation of it, where the idea is you can do and you have your right to pursue happiness, right? You can do whatever the freak you want to do, and you have idiots talking about some I want to go back to sleep. Like, this isn't worth having a conversation with. Let's let the adults talk, please. Can we engage with people who actually have rational ideas?
You assume that an infinite freedom of choice allows for love. The aristocrats in the past recognized, because they had freedom, that they needed discipline for themselves. They needed a restrainment of the choices which they could engage in, so they may be elevated. Only slaves desire freedom in such excess as you do, because they don't have it.
Okay, can I get back in on it?
Yeah, back into this, please. Kali Yuga, destruction is what you advocate for.
Oh fuck, this is funny.
The guild system can work, because like, even in Fnatic, even in your example, like with fiberglass, even if you didn't want to join your father's fiberglass business and learn his trade, you probably had friends that had other careers that you thought were interesting, and you could probably go to your friend's house and ask them to teach you something.
No.
Oh
my God. No, but that no. I'm sorry. That idea doesn't count at all what I'm saying. Please actually engage with it and use your head this time, right?
I thought he was supporting
right,
that.
because the thing no, he's not. The thing that I'm saying, the reason why that's a problem is because, listen, even if you wanted to go to your friend's house to try to learn these trades, first off, you would only be able to do that once you have your adult agency. You don't get to do that when you're a kid. And if you don't have education such that you can probably do other jobs and things like that, and while you're pursuing these other things, it's like, oh, you're 14 years old, and yeah, you haven't learned my trade. Get out of my house. What the freak do you have to fall back on? At least giving people a base level of education allows them to at least have the most opportunity to choose what they want in life, such that they can be successful at whatever the freak they do. Otherwise, you're literally at the will of your parents and hoping to God that they teach you the skills that you actually need to survive, because otherwise you're just screwed.
And when we talk about
everyone, okay, like, this is nonsense. Like on so many levels.
Thank you.
Look, we can deal with this idea of like whether you should like form fucking guilds in the modern age. All right, we can deal with that later. All right, really? we can. No, it's not the same. Okay, so we can deal with that later. We have an open panel right after this, right? Where we can discuss those types of things, right? This nonsense. But let's try to keep focused on the topic at hand, right? Public schools, which do exist, okay, all right, and a state which does exist. Let's work within those lines. For these schools that exist and that are shrinking, right? Are these neighborhoods worse off if their schools disappear? Let's start with that. Tiberius, you want to say something?
Yes, absolutely. Like, number one, like, I don't want to overly agree with Wick in that, like, education's kind of a daycare, but if you even want to take that framing, is that the reality is that if you have a place for the kids to go, you are going to encourage family formation, you're going to encourage investment within your community, because education, whether it's super effective or only kind of effective, it still has one of the best ROIs in all of social spending that you could possibly have. So education is, like, one of the primary things you want to fund until, like, everything else fails. Breaking this down, if you shut down this school so you can take a little more money and maybe put it into this school, that's great. But what do you say to those people who live there? A 5-minute commute versus a 15-minute, 20, 30-minute commute? This is disastrous for families and for their children. Not only because they get less time to be with their family and their loved one, but also in the wonderful world where we have homework and shit, is that you soak up everything that they're doing, and then you don't even give them the money to do it in the ways that they need to. The fact that we've actually fund education in the way that we do here in the United States is absolutely ludicrous. I would love to just tear education apart this whole panel, but we can't. If you close down these schools, you will see what is going on in the Northeast continue to exacerbate itself, where there'll be less families and less children, and you'll have an incredibly high tax burden to pay for the old folks that are still there, but no one who is still working there and growing there to replace them.
Amen. It's about outcomes. And at the end of the day, right, education system gives better outcomes to the communities as a whole, not just in education, but again, when it comes to quality of life, both for the children, right, and for their parents and for the communities. This is just Tiberius. Amen. That's all.
Wait,
I got.
Well,
Tiberius.
the issue here is that like
Agree.
the
Because-
issue here is that you're working under the assumption, right, that education must be done by the state. You're working under the assumption that like individual families, if they didn't have $1.3 trillion of wealth stolen out of the economy, wouldn't be able to invest, and the market wouldn't be able to handle education in a better way. And like it's a simple calculation, right? Like it's a simple Hayekian understanding of the economy that the state needs to investigate price. And they can never understand price because of the economic calculation problem. And so what do? They steal money from the people. They then attempt to investigate and get closer to whatever their goal is. And then they have a monopoly in which they do not actually have to compete for education dollars. They don't have to compete in terms of higher test scores and any of those things. I mean, certain communities may have some level of competition in their funding with other communities to try and bring in jobs, but it's not the same thing because they can pull taxes. They don't actually have to do it for profit. And so the fact of the matter is that if we indeed simply stopped spending 1.3 trillion fucking dollars and instead put that money back in the economy, that averages out to $4,400 a person. That everyone gets more money, and that means more jobs, and that means
More inflation, more all sorts of things.
And now you have an uneducated populace that doesn't know how to spend the money that you're talking about. That's what the problem
You're
has.
assuming that all of the parents will just not fucking educate their children,
Well,
and that private
yes,
schools
yes, I am, and let me explain
Well, see,
why. Sure, you're right. I am making that assumption, but let's explain why that is. The reason why these people aren't going to educate their people, because we're seeing it even now within the public education system, right? Because the public education system isn't just supposed to be the end all be all. It's really, you're supposed to have parents there that are complementing that, but we're still seeing that for a great deal of families, they're still not able to actually take advantage of the education. So you have higher dropout rates when fathers are absent. You have lower math and science literacy for people where the fathers are absent and things like that. So you obviously see that people still aren't even able to fully capitalize on the education that is provided.
Wait, hold on. You completely missed God's point.
If you get rid of it,
failures of the current system,
get rid of it
blaming the
if you
market.
get rid of it all
That's the
together,
dumbest shit I've ever heard.
Okay, sure. So if you get rid of it all together, and we're already seeing that there's a great amount of people who can't even take advantage of it. When it serves as multiple function, it serves as a daycare, right? In the sense that people now don't have to actually pay for whatever while they're working, right?
They are paying. It's called taxes.
Wait, hold on.
$1.3 trillion.
You're being off.
That function is gone. So then if that function is gone, so then now you're going to have now an added responsibility of people trying to find a place where they're going to be putting their children, right? Because you can talk about what the tax dollars or the tax costs are, but like it's not like that direct money coming back to them would all of a sudden fix things. If you were to ask people, if we were to remove the $4,000 or whatever you were saying, it would be in tax. I mean, if we were to give you that $4,000, but instead we're not going to educate your children, do you think that it's going to be adequate for the year? Absolutely not. So like these things absolutely are.
Okay, so Lactoid wants to go, then Isle,
I need
and
this.
then Basil and Tiberius.
Okay, so Prime said we're gonna have this discussion within the realm of there being public schools. So I'm going to play within those guidelines here. And I think Tiberius did, and so I want to address something that Tiberius said. And I just wanted to say, it seems like the solution to this is obvious to me, right? You have some schools which are shrinking because people are leaving, okay? Now, if it gets to the point where it's just simply not feasible to fund these schools because so few students go there, like, why couldn't you just bus them to like a neighboring school? Why couldn't they, you close down the schools and just, run it on like a cost benefit analysis, right? There's like 5 students in this whole school. Well, we'll move them over like 10 minutes and now they have to go to this school. But I mean, it's just cheaper for us to bus them over than it is to, keep an entire school heated and staffed for a whole year otherwise.
It's opportunity cost, because while the front end data would say that the opportunity cost is for you and that you can take, X amount of money for less teachers here so that you can have a few more teachers here and more students per classroom, is that overall you're spending time getting them from A to B. You're making it to where they're not with their families. They're not able to engage in social activities. Every little bit adds up. If you're spending 5 minutes on the bus instead of 30 minutes, it's a big deal.
This is true with every means of travel. This is true
Yes,
with
it is.
every kind of like whenever you have to go anywhere, right? So, if I'm spending 5 minutes on a bus, it's 5 minutes I'm not with my family. But if like the alternative is keeping a school open that has 5 students going to it, that doesn't make any sense.
No, there's obviously a line here. There's obviously a spot where you have diminishing returns, but I think, again, smaller class sizes are a net good, right? Like, again, reducing the infrastructure entirely is bad, but making more flexible infrastructure and more infrastructure, right, is usually a net good. Highest rate of return on investment, right?
Okay.
I want two things here.
Let's get finish your point, Tiberius, and then I'm going to Isle, then Basil, then Wick, if he still wants to go.
Okay, to go to Lactoid, in extremity, you're absolutely correct, and Wick is correct that there's like a line here. The two things that I want to raise to you is, one, we're talking about areas that are actually some of the densest populated areas of the United States. We're not talking about bumfuck Kansas here. We're talking about places that have literally 5,000 people per square mile. So the fact that you're not having enough people to go to these schools to keep them funded tells me that you have a massively different problem than not having not having people to go to them. When it breaks down for me is that I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. Sorry, I completely lost it.
Here, let me help you. It's because those schools tend to suck more for a number of reasons. And this is one of the arguments for school vouchers, is that you allow people to pick the best schools to send their kids to, and there is now a market interaction, right? Now, the best schools have, like, there's more of an incentive to be a good school because you're going to attract more students, and the shit schools, they don't get the benefit of simply having people go to their school because they happen to be located somewhere. They close down, just like a shitty business closes down too.
I really want to deal with this, but like I can't. Tiberius, finish your point. Your response. I'm moving on to Isle next.
Okay. What I wanted to get into is that, at least from the data that I've seen, and granted, like, we have to do a deep dive on this one, is that the primary opportunity cost for the parents is like the proximity to the school itself. Some people will dictate what they want to do based upon sending the schools. I get the school vouchers argument, but at least from what I've seen, this is a purview of the either richer or wealthier denizens of our society, is that they basically move to the school zones in which they want their kids to exist in. Or they don't ship them on a bus and move over. Now, I'm not saying you can't have that, but I think in the reality here is that when it comes to parents' priorities, they want their kids closer.
Okay,
now,
we'll go to Isle.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Go ahead.
We got to go to Isle. We got to move on. Isle, Basil, and Wick. Isle.
Hello.
Isle might be frozen.
Uh-oh.
Isle is deceived from the Discord,
just when they were up. Oh, hold on. They got tossed out. Isle, can you hear her? Isle? Okay. We can't hear you. If you can hear us, we can't hear you at this point in time. I'm going to move on to Basil. Basil?
So 2 points. Firstly, Fanatique, you never addressed the point Scott made, and it was actually a very good point, despite people having issues with Austrian economics. The fact is that there is a disconnect within the marketplace. When you have central planning in terms of academia, you don't really understand what is in the demand in the market. Instead, you decided to put energy into being on the offensive and critiquing an alternative system, when there is a serious question to be had with regards to what ought to be taught, how is it possible for education to be able to have that. And then secondly, I'd like to respond to the question which was initially imposed that we kind of forgot. Would it be better for neighborhoods to have education or academia? Absolutely not. I think it's very clear from the points people like Wick are making that they desire more and more institutionalization, to the point in which, like many Marxists I've spoken to, they wish to take the child out of the family. Okay? The thing is that in a sociological understanding of the world, in order for you to have a preservation of culture. All sociological interaction rituals occur first on the individual level, then on the familial level, and then on higher social levels, and then through the state, right? They wish to invert that cycle so that they can detach the most fundamental things which preserve culture, like family, out of that dynamic so they may take children and adulterate their minds with modernist progressive propaganda.
Well, I mean, it's funny you would say that because then let's look at like in the South where you have the Daughters of Confederacy who have like literally dramatically changed the entire education, and they're educating these children into not believing that the Civil War had anything to do with slavery. What about those
That's
kinds of
because you
things?
don't know anything about the Civil War.
So what about those kind of things? What about the fact that like you have an entire rewriting of history on a bunch of these issues? So what about that? So then they're not instilling those values into those kids. They're instilling an entire different set of values, right? What about the fact that Texas wants to refer to slaves and have been caught doing so multiple times as volunteer workers? What about those kinds of things? So it seems like it's not just the liberals who are inculcating kids with these really ridiculous values. It seems like it's kind of widespread that a bunch of people are doing these kinds of things. But guess what? Most people like those things because if you happen to live in a place where the dominant society is like, some idiots that want to like preach that the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery, you're going to love that because they're just upholding your values. And just like you have these let me finish.
You don't know a goddamn thing about the Civil War. Just stop.
Let me finish. Just like yeah, exactly. Shut up.
Hey,
Just like you have PrimeCayes and his friends who would be completely comfortable when you start teaching like 3 and 4 year olds about like the difference between gender and sex and about gender expression and all those kind of things. He's going to be all for those kind of things, and he's going to want to enroll his kids in schools where they're going to be talking about those things, and maybe they'll graduate to docking by the 7th grade. He's fine with all of that stuff. That makes sense there. Lastly, I think it's absolutely ridiculous to start comparing things like the free market things to something that for essential functions, right? When you have essential functions like education or, I don't know, transportation or all those things, these things start becoming water. These things start becoming utilities because of the fact that we recognize that they're so necessary to society. And if you have like free market things like that, where the government doesn't have over whatever, then you have these incredible problems, right? Like look at the case in like Mexico. Okay, I'll give you the perfect example. Look at the case in like Mexico where they didn't have like these things of making water like such a necessary public utility, and then you have Pepsi, the company, go and buy all of their freaking water supply. So now them niggas can't even afford the water because the water is more expensive than Pepsi. So then all of them are drinking sodas in order to try to like quench their thirst, and they have the highest diabetes rate of like any country in the world. If you don't have protections for utilities and things like that, you run into severe problems. These things should not be left to the free market.
Okay, firstly, you're making a bunch of fallacies because you're making the presumption that these problems are manifestations of things which have to do with academia. The reason is because we live in a managerial neoliberal society. So regarding the point of slavery, because we don't have a clear hierarchical class divide between free people and slaves, because we don't have slavery, everyone becomes a slave in this society. So that point is completely null. Okay.
What did you even say? This nigga's a bot. I'm not going to respond to this. Go ahead.
Yeah, because you're not very intelligent. It's okay. Secondly, you already made a fundamental erroneous axiom, presuming that because lots of people recognize certain things to be valuable on a very basic level, that they must be essential. This is also erroneous. We know what central planning does in terms of relating to a price-coordinated economy. It completely functions inoptimally because people who are pretentious and snobbish like you think they know how to select for things which are essential in the market. They think they know what the needs of the proletariat are. You do not know.
Okay.
Yeah, just real quick. No, I gotta jump in.
No, you
I
don't.
gotta jump in.
You don't.
I gotta jump in. I gotta jump in because
I
like,
gotta Whoa. We got Wick, we got Lactoid, we got Scott, then got Isle. All right.
Okay. So just real quick, like I got called a Nazi this morning. I'm getting called a Marxist tonight. I don't know what's going on. I'm like the everyman here, right? Whatever label you want to throw on me, you can throw it on me. I guess what it is. But when it comes down to it, right? Like when it comes down, like obviously,
well, both
if
of
you
them are
have
socialists. You're just being called a socialist.
We can look at its systems, right? And we can see that some systems have some pros and some cons. Central planning has pros and cons, right? And it's a spectrum, gang, right? I know this is cliche to say, but it is. It's just true. There's a spectrum of how much government control and government regulation we want in certain things, such as utilities. Fanatic gave a great example, right? When it comes to education, we want there to be some form of regulation from the state. There has to be some form of a standard, if you will. Now, we could disagree on what that standard is, but there has to be one there, because without this standard, without the government being able to enforce this standard, it has real bad outcomes for populations. It has real bad outcomes, and it especially hits poor populations more than any other.
Okay, let's go to Lactoid.
Yeah, so, a market function isn't necessarily the same thing as a free market, right? If we can have our public institutions be held accountable by the people that use that service, which school choice does, this creates an obvious pathway to increase the quality of our public schools. People are going to want to send their kids to the schools that are better, and because every school is now competing to be the best in order to stay alive, like a business does, like it's an obvious pathway here to increase the quality. Also, people moving to different school districts, that's what happens absent school choice, right? Because you can't send your kid to a different school without living in that district. So no school choice is like a pro-rich policy, because if you're rich enough, you can just move to whatever school district you want. It's the poor people who can't just get up and move to whatever district they want, who need to have the opportunity to send their kids to the really good schools, right? Which again is what school choice does, and will be able to fix, I think, largely this problem of there being issues with various schools losing students because those students are going to have an opportunity to go to a better school.
Lactate, I would say, as opposed to doing school choice,
would you call me?
Way, Lactate, I'd say, as opposed to doing school choice in that way. I'm sorry, bro. I'm a fan of you, okay? Lactoid. All right, you're a real nigga. You're actually somebody who actually engages in conversations, not these bot Riri niggas. I would say that the other problem that you run into with that though is that when I lost my point. Someone else go.
Oh, it sucks.
Don't call me
someone who engages in conversations.
I was waiting.
So it was Isle, and then I said Isle, and then
I was
friend Scott.
Oh.
Okay, so this reminds me, I think a month and a half ago, with the Supreme Court, they had in the end of their session, they had the main decision about main tax-funded go to religious schools now, because there are just certain districts that are just so depopulated and so poor that they literally don't have any public schools in whole districts, which someone like me who was born and raised in New York City, that just sounds so alien to me, not being able to be within 5 to 10 minutes of walking distance from a school. There's just some places that just don't have any schools, and I thought that was crazy to hear about that in Maine. And so I'm thinking that with these school vouchers and school choice things, I think that maybe we should use these buildings, because the buildings are still there. I think that, with these students that are still in these classrooms and these schools that are there, even though they're dwindling, I think that if we keep the funds there, we freeze the funds that they have right now, and use that money to educate the students that are there, we can actually invest more in their future by giving them specific care, because there's less students for the teachers to have to go through and cycle through. And I think we can increase their education. And for the people who have already left, I think that we should give them a choice to reintegrate back into the schools via vouchers, or maybe let them go to other places, whether it be religious or secular private schools as well. I think we should let parents have choice in these matters. But I definitely don't want these public schools to close, because communities do need places to where they can have a school and where they can have learning.
Thank you so much.
I think the problem with
let's go to Scott, and then you, DeAndre. You'll be next, okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think Fanatic accidentally made a really good point. He just made it in the opposite way by saying that the Daughters of the Confederacy want to teach that the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery, because people have this really, really bad education system, that is because the state controls the education system in such a regard, that they think that slavery was the only actual reason that the Civil War occurred. And so, and that's not what the Daughters of the Confederacy want to do. Academia and institutions that have been captured by the state want to teach this idea that anything other than it was all slavery is just the lost cause movement. But I mean, if you think that I'm wrong, Fanatic, why don't you tell me what caused the Panic of 1857?
So listen, it's so funny that you would say this because literally you're saying that that's because the liberals and everybody they control academia. That's why everyone believes that the slavery was the central cause of the Civil War. Yet less than 18% of high school U.S. seniors can identify slavery as the root cause of the Civil War. This is one of the reasons why we absolutely need CRT. I don't know.
Wasn't the root cause of the Civil War?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
So that would be the sinking of the SS Central America that had
$1.9
trillion in gold.
I heard your mom calls
yeah, nice one.
Ohio Life Insurance and Trust Company collapse, and then of course you had Henry Charles Casey.
Hold on. Before
that had to do with the Civil War. That had to do with Civil War.
Hold on, Scott.
Yeah, it had absolutely everything to do with the Civil
Fanatic
War.
Never said.
Do you know anything about the moral tariff? Do you know anything about the black
never
tariff?
said. Fanatic never said that it was slavery was the only reason, right?
Yes, he did.
No, I did not. No, I did not. No, I did not. No, I didn't. You liar. I did not.
He said the reverse of that, which is that
he said it was the.
Don't worry, Scott can't parse.
It's okay. Scott's not listening. Everyone on the panel knows better, but I didn't say that. So it's okay. Let him finish his stupidity, and it was just move on. Don't do it.
Scott, what was the opposite thing that he said? I didn't catch it. Please.
He said the opposite, right? What he said is that the daughters of the Confederacy want to teach that it wasn't about slavery, which is not true.
That's not the opposite, though, of what you previously stated, right? So the opposite, right, is saying the daughters of the Confederacy are teaching that it has absolutely nothing to do with slavery, right? That's the opposite, right?
That's what he said. He said that it didn't have anything to do with slavery.
Yeah, so absolutely nothing to do with slavery. Yeah, look. He's saying that
it's not a refutation that you could do a multivariate analysis.
So it's a central point.
But he claims that slavery is.
You're not going to get through to him, Prime. You keep trying, though. I respect it.
Okay, so slavery. So look, slavery, in Fanatic's opinion, in my opinion, right, is a central reason for the for the Civil War, right? There are other reasons. There are other reasons, right? And we agree on that. There are other reasons. But there are other people who are saying that it's not at all, right? It's just about states' rights, right?
Nobody's saying that.
States'
rights. The daughters of the Confederacy are not saying that.
Absolutely a thing that happens. But whatever, right?
No, they don't. That was his point. Nothing to do with slavery. That's a lie.
We thought you misstated.
That's a lie from people that are ignorant on the Civil War, including yourself.
Let's just
wait, Scott.
Whatever.
So
no. We're not about to start debating this idiot on the Civil War. If he's so stupid that he genuinely believes it had nothing to do with slavery, we're gonna move on and let him stew in his stupidity. We're not doing this.
That's not an issue.
That's not what the topic is. That's not what the topic is. We're gonna go ahead and move on and make sure that we're talking about education. Lactate. I'm sorry, lactose.
No, we're talking about.
You're gonna make your point. We're not doing that, bro. Come on.
We get the Fanatic just loves to scream.
This is like a Civil War panel now.
To hide from the fact that he's ignorant.
No, come on, bro.
Hold on, Fanatic.
This is about the Civil War now. This whole fucking
Even if you think he's wrong, it's not that he's stupid, it's that he's ignorant. But I do agree with him. Slavery was a thing which was brought up. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, Lactoid.
Yeah.
That wasn't.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, Scott, the Daughters of the Confederacy, they do minimize the role of slavery in the Civil War, right? It was a major cause, the primary reason why the Civil War occurred. And it is not.
To say that requires you to be.
Scott, were you homeschooled, Scott? Scott, were you homeschooled? Because that would fucking explain shit,
dude.
Right?
You guys are not even arguing with anything.
Okay.
You guys are
you don't know. Like, so, I bring up the moral tariff. I bring up the moral tariff. You have no idea what it is. I bring up the SS Central America. You have no idea what it is.
But all the
bring up the Bank Charter of 1844 in England.
This is completely tertiary. Oh my God! Shut up. It's completely tertiary.
But this is the problem with public education. Is all you dumb fucks have no understanding of history.
Shut the fuck up. Holy shit. Shut the fuck up. I don't care anymore. Right? This is not the purpose of this conversation. Been all over the fucking map with nonsense, okay? So look, all right? Lactoid, you have something quickly to say to finish it, but Pace was next, okay? So,
yeah, I learned everything I know about the Civil War from Paradox games. So,
okay,
not from public
That's powerful.
So, Pace, please. You've been trying to break in. I want to make sure you have space.
Well, kind of lost my train of thought several times into this, but I think the primary issue of public schools is the lack of access to decent public education. And when I mean access, I don't mean the ability to go to the public school that's in your area. I mean, Scott brought up earlier the key factor and the reason why public education is so flawed and is a failure is the fact that the government has a monopoly on the education system. If you were to privatize the education system and allow multiple schools to be opened within these areas, and if one school that the government demanded that your kids went to, which, for example, if you are in West Baltimore where 70% of the students cannot read or write or do math at grade level, and that school was not performing to your standard, you would just be able to move your kid to another school. That would be the ideal version of school choice, where the money is following your child, so that they don't have to continue to participate in a school that is underperforming. And the schools that underperform, just like if you were to allow the free market to do things with other private businesses and entrepreneurships, would go out of business and be replaced by other schools or other companies that would come into that building and create another school or a system that would compete with the schools that have taken over in that particular area.
Yeah, that was one of
It
the.
all comes down to the access information. I don't believe in completely destroying public education. What I call for is a removal of government from education. It's not government's role to provide education.
It
It's
is.
their
I think
role
the
to
government's
provide
absolutely.
access to education.
But the government
If
is
I could,
absolutely essential in like making sure that its citizens are well educated. I think that absolutely is like part of what allows them to actually pursue freedom. So I think that absolutely makes sense why
You
they
will
would
never
do
find that in the
that. And then
Constitution of any government.
it
Wait,
doesn't
you,
have to be in the
there's a
government.
whatever.
fundamental
I
mistake
just
that's
explained to
being
you.
made,
I just explained to you
even
what
in
it is,
terms
why it
of the
would be
degree
removed
of
there. And
having
then the second
access
thing I would say is that when you start talking about
go
when
on,
you start
go on,
talking about
buddy.
the second thing
Do
I
a
know
soy
I
face.
will. I know I will. Shut up.
Do a soy face. Do a soy
The
face.
second thing is when you start talking about school choice in that way, I would say that like one like what you would end up having is first off, the government doesn't have a monopoly on education. You have
Yes, they
private
do.
alternative. Well, okay, well then you have private alternatives. That means it's not a monopoly. You have obviously you have freaking homeschooling. That means that they don't have an anomaly. You have charter schools, which also means that they don't have an anomaly. So I mean a monopoly. I'm sorry. So the idea that that like they're the only ones that are educating people is just 100% untrue. The thing is, the reason why so many people use the public option is because, and this sucks to say, it's really, really gross. That is the best option for most
Because of
families.
credentials.
That is the best option for most
No,
families.
that's not the reason why. It's
Most
because that
people,
is the
most
only
people
option
are
that most
not
people
going.
have.
Well, all right. Well, I mean, what do they not have access to private school? Oh, they can't afford
Most
that,
people,
huh? Do they
most
have
people
access
who
to
are sending their
homeschool?
kids to
Oh,
other
that's right. They
schools
don't
do
do that
not
because they
have
have to
access to
work.
that
So
because they
it
don't
is the
have the
best
money
option.
for
It
it.
is the best. Okay, right. So then, if you don't have the money, then getting the free education is the best option. So in all of these
No,
cases,
the best
oh, okay.
option
If
is
you, so
to
then you
allow
can obviously
for
not pay
competition in the
and
market.
homeschool your kids, but then you still have to come up with the curriculum. You have to have the know-how, and then you obviously need to fund that yourself as well. So in reality, for most families, public education is the best option, and it's sad to say. Now there are alternatives. We've obviously seen that like charter schools have done great things for Black people in several districts, right? But the idea is most people don't have the means to do so. Charter schools don't come with public with public transportation, and there are other hurdles that you even encounter with that. If we could, yeah, we would probably just all be pursuing alternatives when our schools are failing because the alternatives are there. Show me an area where where the public schools are completely abysmal and there are zero options. And guess what? You can't. You know why? Because homeschooling is always an option,
No,
but it's not an option when you're a struggling working class family that's making ends meet.
You're assuming. Wait, hold on. You're assuming the market is like completely free in terms of this aspect. That's not the case. The fact is that there are diplomas and credentials which are necessary barriers of entry into many jobs, which I think is very wrong. There's a great book by F.M. Alexander called The Use of the Self, in which he expresses the prime means by which you educate someone is not through a results orientated system, which is necessary in the egalitarian academia which you support, but through a system of means whereby in which you directly engage with the substance and you have to accord to the standards of the person whom you're being taught by with disregard to an abstraction of results. Okay. And so the thing is like it's not completely free, and there is some competition, but the competition is being outcompeted by a public system which gets all of the funding in the world, and so they don't even have the chance to compete to begin with.
Well, let's go to Wick and then.
Even then, I think we still need people.
I just really want
to
to really quick. I want to address
credentials and
vouchers
standards.
specifically because I think vouchers are one of the more reasonable suggestions that people have made on this panel, right? And in a vacuum, right? If you're just looking at like the idea is sound, right? Like if your kid isn't going to a school that's working for you, you should have the option to go to another school, and that money should follow you. That seems reasonable, right? But the problem comes in that it starves out the remainder of schools, right? Like, and again, even access.
Failing schools fail. Yeah.
No, it doesn't starve out those. It doesn't starve
It
out
absolutely
at all.
does.
What it does is
it removes
it
that
causes a
funding.
correction.
Public schools can't fail.
It's not that the funding has been removed. It's that school can no longer afford to operate ineffectually, which means that they have to either A, up their standards for performance, or B, close down.
But in a lot of cases it results in them closing down, and there are a lot of parents.
They refuse to
bad
increase
outcomes
performance
with the community. It has bad outcomes with the community. Tiberius outlined a lot of them very early on in this discussion, right? He talked about how increased commute time specifically, right, can have a very, it creates these inequalities, right, that we can see in the haves and the have-nots, and it just exacerbates this problem we have where, again, the poorest communities
did not bother the people who went to school in the 1920s and the 1910s when they went and they would travel miles to get a good education, a good, decent education. So don't use commute time.
You can't compare those two things.
1920s are not.
Hold on. Wait, here's a better argument for that. You have to consider. Yes, a lot of times in those the reasons why there was no healthy comparison, right? There was no healthy alternative. When your only option is to travel X amount of distance in order to get an education, then yes, of course.
No, it wasn't in order to get an
education. But if you had, okay, fine. But if you had a local education that was like comparable, then you would choose that every time. And to say that there were no other negative ramifications for them having to do those traveling, it's just obviously not true, right? So they're doing what they had to do in order to make it. But like, yeah,
go read.
This is another critique against modernity.
Can
we not? Let's go. After Pace is done, then let's go to Lactoid and then Tiberius.
I mean, the pursuit, which is, if we're all talking about anything about free market entrepreneurship, pursuit is the most important word in free market. Is that you are allowed to pursue and choose what is best for you, and you look at what happened before, and this is the key factor, and this is the way that the teachers unions have fought against the inception of allowing parents to make the choice is because you would assume that parents would make a poorer choice than the government has already made, when that is not the case. When you compare that to what existed before then, we did not have this gross disparity and disparage in education, and you cannot use commuting as an excuse for why we should subject our children to poor qualities of education.
We shouldn't. Like,
you're asking. Sorry. Lactoid.
That was not.
I really want to respond to this
before.
No.
I really want to respond.
It's fine. A lot of people want to respond.
Do a soy face, Wick. Do a soy face.
You can respond to me as well, because I'm gonna argue in favor of what he's saying as well, right? There's been a couple points made that I don't think necessarily make sense, right? You can believe in school choice. Believing in school choice doesn't mean you don't believe that like kids are entitled to an education, right? It just means that the money follows the student. It isn't sat in a particular zip code. It isn't sat in a particular neighborhood. It's the only thing that actually gives people, like, in a failing school, that opportunity to go to a better school. Is it true that, a failing school is going to like lose students? Yeah, of course. We would never make this argument for any other form of institution, right? If we had any other business or government institution that was just like performing abysmally, and there were other ones that were doing the same task but a lot better, like, it would just make everybody would acknowledge, we should just like encourage the better ones and ignore like the bad one, because everyone's going to want to move away from the bad one anyway. Like, it's literally like a market function. And also, I haven't seen any data ever to like people in suburbs like commute way more than people in urban areas, yet still, like, because they have access, because of higher property taxes, they have access to better schools. And so they're all of them, all the studies indicate they do better, even though they have a higher commute time. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that like an extra 10 minutes of commute time is like bad at all compared to the increased quality of education by going to a better school.
All right, so
just to be fair to the left here, right? The commute time doesn't affect suburbs as much because they have a higher socioeconomic status, far more likely to own cars and vehicles and things like that. So like 10 minutes of driving is like, yeah, I mean, like, I'm with you, just bust them. But like, just to be fair, people living in the inner city, way more likely to use public transport, way less likely to have a car, way more likely to be affected by needing to commute to go to education.
So let's go to Tiberius, and then Wick, you want to respond to all that?
So I'm going to split some hairs, because while I did talk about like how there was an opportunity cost in like commute times, is that it probably isn't one of the bigger deals that you guys are pegging on. So like, I'm actually going to concede that. But the reality here, at least from the data that I've seen, is that the amount of money that is spent into like the personal education of people isn't really the school's generated, or I'm sorry, that is not the number one premeditator on if a school is successful or not. Largely what we find is that, do they come from a community that is both stable, family-wise, and the community in general is that they actually support the kids' education? Do they have daycares that will actually be like, hey, while you're here, we would like you to study, not go fuck off into the ether for 3 hours and, do whatever you want. For me, this is probably like literally my most left-wing take, so I'm probably going to roll some heads on this one, is that when you have school choice, you probably actually just create a social vacuum to where the people who are affluent and the people who afford these better social structures, because either they're doing successful or not, simply remove themselves from those that they do not wish to be around. And while you may very much approve that, and I, being a liberty-liking person, do like that, I think the social consequences for this are disastrous.
No, it's the exact opposite.
It's the opposite.
No, shut up.
It's the exact opposite.
I think it's good.
I don't think that it is. In fact, usually what I find is that this is a social coercion engine to where anyone who can be brought up by the environment in which they exist in simply are left to rot on the vine because they have nothing to feed them, because they have nothing from their peers to set an example. Like, I'm going to put it this way. I don't even think school is really an education platform. It's a social engineering platform. This is literally my most left-wing take. It is
Tiberius,
not,
I love you.
No,
Tiberius. It is
no,
not
Tiberius.
about
Let me respond to this,
the quality of education really as much as the social conditioning that it provides. And yeah, I get where like that throws hairs for a lot of people. But the reality that I've seen, and every data point that I have pretty much come across, is that it's not about the money. It's about, do they have family that is going to spend time with them, make sure that they do their homework, or do they have communities that are like, oh, hey, I actually like you, I care about you, the police officer is going to be here making sure that you all are doing your things, and you're actually doing your homework, you're studying, you have school sports that you all can participate in. I'm sorry, literally, if you look at all of those metrics, they correlate extensively to student success.
This is really key. Shut up.
I'm going to respond.
It's Wix.
Do a soy face, Wick. Do a soy face,
right? Look, when it comes down to it, school choice, when we talk about school choice, is parents' choice. And the sad fact is that a lot of parents don't give a shit. So again, when you allow parents who don't give a shit, like when if we move to a voucher system, there's a lot of parents who just wouldn't take it.
Yeah, but see, you're making the assumption that
Can
parents
I finish?
make a poor choice in the government.
My assumption is that we shouldn't allow this difference in choice. We should mitigate it, right? We should mitigate the difference between families. We should mitigate the difference between families, right, who have loving parents who care about the education, by public education, by providing a stable standard platform in communities. So whether your parents care or not, this is mitigated. It is not entirely undone, right? But it is mitigated by having local, financially sound and financially invested in institutions such as schools that will help you. And there are other community needs that are needed as well. But when we talk about the voucher systems, this is going to starve out right? All these local schools, right? And so the parents who do not choose to invest in these vouchers are going to be left with no choice at all, right? And these children are going to suffer for the poor choices.
Invest in vouchers? No,
Okay.
no, I
Wait,
have to stop. No, no. Tiberius D. Fucking.
No, stop. I'll decide. Okay, Scott.
I'll be quick. Number one, you are right about the one thing, which is that ACEs are the number one cause of adverse outcomes in education, right? Adverse childhood effects, right? Whether or not a father is in the home massively changes how successful you are in school. Whether or not you've seen a dead body, whether or not a close family friend or somebody has been killed, whether or not there's violence in your community, whether or not there's nutrition issues. These are all, this has way bigger of an impact than the schools themselves. That being said, what we have right now is that wealthy people leave communities to go to communities with better schools. And poor people are stuck in communities with shitty schools. And then those schools' funding is tied by the zip code. And then they fail because they have a bunch of shitty people in the schools, as well as the fact that they have low funding in the schools. Then the schools get even worse. Teachers don't want to go to these really trash schools. And the problem just starts building with more and more problems as the cycle continues. With vouchers, where it's tied to the children, there is less of a financial incentive for wealthier people to leave bad neighborhoods. They're more likely to stay and invest in the community because it doesn't require that their kid goes to a shitty school, and it doesn't require that they move out of it. You have less of the white flight if you have school vouchers. So the exact opposite happens when you tie education dollars to individual students and you allow them to be bused to the schools that they're going to. What actually happens is more investment into the community, less crime, and better education because of a marketplace.
Okay, I want to respond to this.
Let's go. We like run out of time out of this, so we're just gonna have to move on.
You Christian socialist. Who did you say could speak?
I'll.
Okay. I think he said I could. I'm gonna respond to Wick because when he was talking about like mitigating choice to like even out between families and things of that nature with good parents and bad parents, I think that's evil because why are you trying to punish children and parents for the crimes of loving their children? Why are you trying to cripple these children that have good households, okay?
What?
Why
it's
are
not
you mitigating the choices? Yeah.
Yo, if I get called evil, I need to talk about this, right?
No, guys.
No, Wick, you said that you want to mitigate choice because you want to stop having a gap between parents that love their children and parents that don't love their children and do shitty choices with their children. So why are you punishing good parents that love their children? Why are you trying to cripple these children that come from good households?
Okay. It's not about punishing, right? It's about lifting up and mitigating the harm that the bad parents do, right? In public education, like to Scott's point, he's absolutely asininely wrong on this, like demonstrably wrong. Rich people don't generally live. There's a lot of reasons they move out of these poor neighborhoods, and it very, very rarely is a school issue, right? Because they can still afford to go to private school,
I'm not talking
right?
about
Which they can go.
Okay, I'm sorry. We gotta leave it. Hey, we gotta leave it there.
We can't please make one point. I beg
Wait, but Wick didn't finish his point.
Wick.
Whoa! Shut up. Thank you. All right, we ran out of time. All right. Next time, don't get distracted by bullshit. If you want to focus on this, right? And next time, honestly, we gotta have a smaller thing to go on school vouchers, right? Like I gotta bring Lactoid in. I gotta yell at him.
Yeah, I want to get a lactate too over that. That was crazy.
Okay, yeah.
I'm motherfucker.
I'm me. But you gonna say something like Lactoid?
Yeah, he was saying that you said that you shouldn't be able to cut it and whatever.
Black community so much and why you want them to suffer. I just
okay. Yeah. All right. Cool.
I gotta come up
anyway,
with some name for you.
So we're gonna.
Seems
we'll
kind of
have to
racist.
have,